Hello, everyone. Welcome to the SavvyCast. This is Jamie, and I'm very grateful to all of you who are joining, whether you're watching on YouTube or listening to the podcast. Today, we are going to dive into a very serious topic, and it's one that I think is much needed for discussion. And I'm very grateful to have a friend who has been on here twice before, Lizzie Harbin, and she is joined by her lovely mother, Jane Burkhart. They are both very, very accomplished women, and I could read a very lengthy bio for each because they have a lot that they have accomplished. That will all be in the show notes because today they're joining me to have a deeply personal conversation, and they are doing this out of their desire to hopefully help anyone listening or watching who might find themselves in a similar situation. Jane and Lizzie, I can't thank you enough for joining me today on the SavvyCast.
Grateful to be here and happy to be here, Jamie.
Absolutely. Good to see you again.
Yes. Okay. I'm just going to start. The topic today, it is about abuse. And I just want to say, for those who aren't watching, you're listening, I know you can read the bios, but Lizzie and Jane are what you would call women who have had very, very successful lives, very privileged, very accomplished. And one thing that says to me is that abuse is not isolated to any demographic, to any socioeconomic status. There are no boundaries. And I just hope that anyone listening will embrace that as we have this conversation. But Lizzie and Jane, I just want to first of all start by asking you, why do you want to share your story?
Well, I'll go first on that. I think that sharing our story is actually healing for Lizzie and I. We went for years talking about it with each other, but really not sharing it in public. And we had an opportunity last year to do a live fundraising event for a women's shelter where we were interviewed by a newscaster, and it was just called A Candid Conversation. And we were amazed after finishing that, the number of women who were in the audience who came up to us and shared a story, either of their own abuse or of their child's abuse or someone in their family. That really inspired us to get more involved in telling our story.
And Lizzie, I'm sure you echo that.
I do. And I just wanted to add on, part of this is, and I've been on my own physical health journey where I've lost my health and regained it. And I learned earlier this year that 110 million Americans suffer from autoimmune diseases, and 95% of them have had childhood trauma that's unresolved. And so for me, it became deeply personal as I went on this healing journey, and I did EMDR therapy last summer. I know we can talk a little bit more about that later in the podcast. It was definitely for us, I think, a piece of our own healing to share, and then overwhelmed, like Mom said, by how many people we had in fact helped. So now I feel like we're sort of being called to go on this journey together and share this story, because it is amazing how many people connect. Somebody, before we started this, somebody dropped by my house this morning to pick something up, and I was like, oh, and told them I was going to be on SavvyCast, and oh, is it about compounding? No, it's about being domestic violence survivor. And they were like, what? And then they proceeded to share, their own situation that they had at some point. So I think it's way more prevalent than we think. And I think Mom does a great job sharing that there's no shame, there's no guilt. And, we're survivors, not victims. And so it's important to share.
Well, I've read your stories both in detail, and I have no words. So I'm going to let you all put the words to your story. I do want at the outset to ask you, I use the term abuse, then you just use the word domestic violence. I want to make sure I'm speaking accurately in this space. Does domestic violence include any kind of abuse, male to female, female to male? Can you just give us a clear picture of that before we start?
I believe that domestic violence, yeah, it's an umbrella term for any time there's any type of abuse. It could be verbal, emotional, psychological, physical, leading up to assault, etc. And it could be, yes, between two partners, female to male, male to female, same-sex
Okay.
partnerships, and then also the children. And so in our story, my mom was a spouse and I was the child, I was a daughter. And so we experienced the same things sometimes, but through different lens based on role and age and those kind of things. But Jamie, I feel like the terms are also interchangeable.
Mhm.
Domestic abuse, domestic violence. I mean, I think
Yeah.
either is appropriate.
Well, there are three things that you all are going to share. They're shocking. I would like to start with Jane because Jane, you were first to meet Lizzie's dad. And so you had the first interaction with him. You married. So tell us about that. And I know everyone's going to want to know when you had the first glimpse that there could be an abusive person behind that.
Well, if you read the story, the first glimpse went straight over my head, which I feel that really happens with a lot of women. If you didn't grow up with that in your life, I don't think you recognize it immediately. So I was 21 years old. I had completed 3 years of college at that point, and I decided that I wanted to travel. So I became a flight attendant for American Airlines. And I met Lizzie's father on a flight, and he was 13 years older than I am, and very accomplished, and written up in the Wall Street Journal, known nationally in his profession. And essentially, I was a little girl at 21 and sort of blown away by all of the experiences that I was having with him, travel and things that I had really not experienced. So when we were dating, there was one red flag. And I was at the time based in Boston, and he flew there, took me out to dinner, and was sort of distant and pouty through the dinner. And I didn't know exactly what was wrong with him. But the next morning, he came to my apartment, and he was in a fury and accused me of flirting with the waiter at the restaurant. And I was pretty shocked because I thought I had been appropriately friendly and nice to the waiter. In the midst of this, I was in my bare feet, standing up on some steps, and he was down below on a foyer. He threw his keys across my bare feet so hard that it cut all of my toes. And I'm a little embarrassed to say that shortly after that, we got married, but I sort of chalk that up to, well, it was a misunderstanding. It was an accident. He didn't mean to do that. So that was really my first experience.
So, Jane, would you say that you made your first of many excuses for him that day?
Yes. So we got married. We had 2 children within the first 5 years that we were married. And there was not really physical abuse at that time. It was mental, controlling. He chose what I would wear. He bought my clothes. I could not go out and buy anything myself. If I did, he had to be with me. If he was traveling and couldn't reach me by phone, and of course this was before cell phones, I mean, he would call every neighbor up and down the street to find out where I was. It was just the most controlling environment. I literally had no life of my own at all. And because he traveled for business, when he did travel, I was myself and I was happy and relaxed. And the minute he would come home, I would go into almost a non-functioning depression. One day he said to me, "Why is it when I'm out of town and I speak with you, you're happy, and I come home and you just want to stay in bed and sleep?" And it was like a light bulb went off in my head. And I realized what a terrible situation I was in. I mean, he even isolated me to some extent from my family, my mother, my dad, my sister, brother. He sort of controlled how much time I spent with them, and he was always there. There was never alone time with my family.
May I ask a question here?
Sure.
Did the neighbors or friends or family, did anyone say, what is going on? He's did nobody challenged? Did anyone notice?
I don't think so, because I didn't share with anybody what I was going through at home. And outwardly, if we were socializing or something, I think on the outside, everything appeared to be pretty normal. It was inside of our home that was not normal. So at age 28, I really thought long and hard, went to see a therapist, and decided that I did not want Lizzie and her little brother to grow up thinking this was normal, that this is the way a family operated. So I filed for divorce. And you hear all the time when someone's trying to get away from a bad situation that it escalates. And that was so true in our case. The escalation became crazy at times. He would follow me, he wouldn't pick up the children, they would be waiting for him and constantly disappointing them. And he would say, "I'm not taking them because I don't want you to be able to have a life." And he never realized that they were my life. I was very happy to be with them. That's where I wanted to be. And I always worried when he took them because I knew how volatile he could be. I think we touched on, and maybe I didn't even have this in the story, Jamie, but one of the last straws for me was a Sunday afternoon, and he liked to have a lot of people around. So we had a backyard pool, and there were probably 15 people there. And, you know, as normal, you just use plastic glasses around the pool. But as the day wore on, I was running out of glasses. Somebody asked for another drink. I walked out with a glass that was actually glass. And I was just going to make a note to the person to be careful with it. And in front of 15 people, I won't even repeat the words he said to me beyond how something stupid can you be? And I literally dropped the glass, turned around, went inside and left and went to a hotel. Even though the children were with him, he was always good to them. And we had full-time help. And I knew that the next day on Monday that she would be there and the kids would be okay. But I just needed to back away and think through this. And that's when I filed for divorce. But as you read, that became just a nightmare. Got a temporary restraining order, and he was allowed to come to the house, get his clothes, etc. And then it just escalated. Everything was out of control. The way he treated the children, he was no longer this good dad that he had been before. And a therapist explained to me that he did not have the ability to separate me from the children, and that his good parenting up until that point had been a way of keeping me there. And as soon as he was angry at me, he started to treat them quite differently.
And how old were they at this point?
So Lizzie was, I guess,
5
or 6. Yeah. And so Josh would have been 3 or 4.
So it went from bad to worse. When you divorced him, it became worse because he didn't try to be nice, didn't try to fool anyone. At that point, did friends and family see his behavior and start trying to help?
I think they understood more. But again, there was a stigma. So really, neither one of us shared a lot. It was like we had each other, we discussed it. We would discuss it with my son when the three of us were together. But outside of the circle, there wasn't a lot of talk about it, which is really unfortunate until recently. And Lizzie has always been involved in the Fort Bend County Women's Center. She's been on the board. She's been president of the board. I've been involved as part of being a donor. When she made the decision last year and said, Mom, how do you feel about sharing our story? I really didn't hesitate at all. I thought it was something we really needed to do for us and for anyone who was listening.
So, Jane, may I ask you, you've got two small children. Now things are worse. A restraining order is not working. How did this resolve? Can I let everyone know he's no longer living, correct?
Correct.
How fast forward to how it ended and what happened in that space?
Well, so many different things happened. The first thing was that Josh, my son, was constantly disappointed when he wouldn't show up to pick up the children. They would be dressed, waiting, and he just would no show, no phone call. Or I might get something on the answering machine that said, I hope the fact that I didn't show up screwed up your plans, or it was always about getting at me, but they were being hurt. So I took Josh to a therapist. The therapist said, I really want to speak with his father. Josh was in with the therapist. Lizzie and I were in the waiting room, and he walked in and he was late. And I said in this tone, you're late. Nothing major, just you're late. He grabbed me by the hair, pulled me to the ground in front of Lizzie. She's sitting there in a chair, and then started kicking me in the back.
In front of other people as well? You're in a waiting
No
room?
one was in the waiting room but the
It was
three of
just my
us.
mom and I in the waiting room.
The
But at the therapist's office, I mean, that's unbelievable.
Yes.
Unbelievable.
The therapist came out, it stopped. The therapist spoke with him and said, your son needs to know when you're going to see him, even if it's 1 hour a week. He needs to be able to count on it. And he stormed out of the therapist's office saying, I'll see my children when I want to. I'm not freeing up her life to have a life. Again, it went back to that for some reason, he thought that if he had the children, I was going to be living the high life somewhere. I don't know. I don't know exactly what he thought. Very shortly after that is when he called me on a Saturday morning and said, and he had the children. This is a weekend that he actually picked them up. He said, I'm coming to pick you up. And if you don't get in the car, I have a gun and I'm going to kill the children. My parents were at my house having brunch with me, and he pulled up in front of the house. My father came out and tried to reason with him. And my father didn't want me to go. And I said, I'm going. I'm getting in the car with my children. I got in the car and he said, we are going to Oklahoma. You are going to marry me again. This is after the divorce. So I realized that he was just out of control. I think he had not been sleeping. There was possibly, I don't know this for sure, but possibly cocaine involved. So we're driving to Oklahoma, and somehow I convinced him to go back to Dallas. I said, let's go back to Dallas. I don't have any clothes. I don't have toiletries. It was the time of the state fair. And I said, we'll take the kids to the state fair. Monday, we'll go shopping so we can go get married in the courthouse. And when we got back to his house, he locked the children in a bedroom. He sat across from me at the kitchen table with a gun between us and was just screaming. I finally convinced him. I said, let me call my parents and let them know that we're okay, because I'm sure that they were beyond devastated. And covertly, I let my dad know where we were. And shortly after that, my dad and the police showed up at his house. But you have to realize at that time, domestic violence was handled so differently. The policeman came to the door and said, your ex-father-in-law tells me that you are an executive with an international company, and do you realize how much trouble you can be in? You need to let your ex-wife and your children go. He did, and that was it. I mean, today, luckily, that doesn't happen.
So it was exposure, fear of exposure.
Yes,
Yeah.
that made him let us go. Yes.
So all those years, the secrecy enabled him to carry out that abuse. But
Yes.
when he was threatened with exposure, which of course today you're going to be exposed, you know, even if you, whether you may not have even, I mean, totally different today. But oh my goodness. Okay. So then it stopped then. And then how did it end? Did you have just very minimal until he died, or did he ever apologize, or?
You know, as he got older, I think he sort of, I hate to use the word mellow because I don't know that that guy was ever mellow, but I think he got over the rejection. I don't think he was someone that could handle rejection. And look, we've all had that in our life. We know it doesn't feel good, but you don't act out on those levels, obviously. Lizzie will tell a story about $100 bill that the children didn't tell me until they were adults because they were
Yeah.
sworn to secrecy by him. The only other story that I'm going to touch on, and then I'll turn it over to Lizzie, is he never let up on what I'm going to call psychological abuse. He took the children to London, called me from London, again, totally before cell phones or anything. And he said, I met someone on the flight coming over here and I'm going skiing with them in Switzerland. The children are in a hotel in London and I've told them how to get to Heathrow Airport and they'll be on the flight that you have the information on tomorrow. And these were little kids. And I'm like, what hotel are they in? Because all I could think was that I would call the London police and tell them to go to that hotel and get my kids. Well, he hung up. It would be like calling the New York City police and saying, children are in some hotel in New York City. Maybe today with computers, they might be able to find them. But at that time, nothing. So I spent a night of pure terror, wondering where my children were. Were they okay? Were they sold into some human trafficking? I mean, your mind just goes crazy. At that time, you could go out, all the way out to the airport to customs. And when I saw the flight attendant coming with my children, I broke down sobbing just from relief that they were okay. She said to me, your children are amazing. And I said, oh, thank you. I think so too. And she said, no, seriously, I didn't even know that they were unaccompanied minors because, you know, an unaccompanied minor at that time, you have a little tag with contact information. They had gotten themselves from downtown London to Heathrow Airport.
Oh my goodness.
Gotten
How old again? How old again?
11 and 13.
Yeah, 11 and
Oh my stars.
Yeah.
And she said, I didn't know they were alone until I was passing out declaration forms and your daughter raised her hand and said she needed one. The flight attendant said, I gave it to your parents, pointing to the couple behind Lizzie and Josh. And Lizzie said, those aren't my parents.
Oh my goodness.
But him leaving them there was another way of terrorizing me. And I'll let Lizzie tell a few of her stories and how that impacted her.
Unbelievable. Yes, Lizzie, you weigh in.
Sure. Well, first, just a couple of comments with what Mom shared, you know, how it escalated when she left. Statistically, a woman will leave her partner who was abusing her 7 to 9 times before she actually leaves finally. So I'm very proud of my mom that she left and we didn't have the 7 to 9 time situation, which is unusual. The other is more textbook. because that's when the violence escalates. And that's when people are at most risk actually to be killed. I mean, if you look at these situations when, a mom and the kids may both be killed, it's typically during, and that's not a reason to stay, but I think it's a reason to not go back and get caught up in that cycle. I think that that's very important. And then it's funny because, Mom, I know you talked about how we shared a lot during this time. It's like we shared surface stuff with each other, because I think there are things we've learned just this summer as we've gone through this journey. And when my children, who are now almost 24 and 26, when they were 3 and 5, for me, a lot of things were coming back up. I think that I had like repressed memories and had talked to my mom then when my kids were that age. But for me, yeah, it is complicated because my dad, right? And this is a person who is supposed to protect and love me more than anyone other than my mom. And he really violated that relationship over years. And I know it's probably hard for people to understand why, even after, she left or we left, that he was in our lives pretty much the whole time. As probably, I'd say after, by the time I was a teenager, my adult life, it was much more limited. I didn't live in Dallas. I would see him for dinner. I never stayed there. I never let him be alone with my children or anything like that because of his anger issues. And for me, you also asked, did he ever apologize? I gave him grace he probably didn't deserve, but he never apologized or owned any of these things that he did. And when I did try to talk to him about them later as an adult, he'd say, it was in my head, I made it up, and actually deny it, which I think is also, pretty common. But so when they got separated, we started seeing him. It was supposed to be like Wednesday night and every other weekend. And as Mom said, it was very inconsistent. But one weekend early on, we were with him and he brought us into his bedroom and he sat us on the bed, and we're 3 and 5. And he said, I need to talk to you about something very serious. And he said, I'm missing $100 bill. And I know that one of you took it. So I need for you to confess. And we are not leaving this room until someone confesses and I have my $100 back. Well, we're little kids. We didn't take the money. We're a little confused. And we both say, we didn't take the money. We didn't take the $100 bill. Well, this escalates. And in my childlike mind, it seems like it went on for hours, but it was probably seconds, if even minutes. And it escalates to him screaming, cussing, punching the wall, calling us effing little liars, all this kind of stuff, and just being really kind of in a violent rage and screaming, we're not leaving until, someone confesses. Well, eventually my brother, who's 3, he points to me and says, Lizzie took the money. And I mean, can you blame him? He's being told by a crazy person, one of us took it. He knew he didn't. So process of elimination, it had to be me. And so he accused me of that. And then my dad just got really calm. This calm came over him. And then he sat down as well. He took a $100 bill out of his pocket. And he said that nobody took the money, that it was a test, and that Josh had failed the test. And the test was, don't rat, don't tell. And he proceeded to take his belt off and he beat Josh in front of me.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah. So we did not tell for years and years and years. I mean, we saw all kinds of things that we did not share, didn't talk about with each other's, didn't tell. And then other things like the kid, like I knew we were being kidnapped when we were kidnapped. And I always had this sense, it was a very unrealistic sense that somehow I could fix it and help everyone. And so when we were locked in that bedroom, he had a sliding glass door, and I opened it up as quietly as I could. And then there were like boxwood hedges. And I knew that if I could get over the boxwoods, that I could go and get help, not knowing that, my mom had gotten hold of my grandparents and they'd call the police. And somehow something I did, my dad came to check on us, and I got stuck. I was straddled over these boxwoods like this little kid, like literally sprawled over him, and he picked me up by my shirt, like, like a puppy, and brought me back in and said, lock the door, and threatened us if we moved again and had to stay there. But there are a lot of situations like that. And, it's interesting because I have 3 dogs now and I love dogs. And I just said, brought me in like a puppy. There was one time we wanted a dog as a family really badly. And so we went to Highland Park, would be the equivalent of Mountain Brook, I guess. We went to Highland Park in Dallas and we went to a breeder and we brought home a standard black poodle puppy. My dad was out of town. And when he came home and saw the puppy, he was so furious. And there was a fire going. It was winter, and he grabbed the puppy by the neck and he threatened to throw the puppy in the fire in front of all of us if the puppy wasn't out of the house by the count of 3.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
Wow. So to what do you attribute that to? Mental illness, evil, a combination of both? Like when you look at him and all of that, have you ever pinpointed why?
I think when I was younger, I would have attributed it to evil and stuff. As I've grown up and learned a lot more, I think he had a traumatic childhood. That does not excuse bad behavior, but I think that led to maybe some undiagnosed personality disorders that he most likely had, which is a form of mental illness. His mother died in childbirth with him. He had kind of a tumultuous first 5 years of his life in terms of being bounced around to relatives. My grandfather was very young. And then when he eventually remarried, he and his wife raised my dad from the age of 5 on. I don't know, Mom, what do you think? I mean, it's pretty inexcusable. It's very inexcusable, the things he did, but.
Well, looking back, I would say he was very insecure, although he came across as being large and in charge of everything and everyone around him. I think that rejection was absolutely not an option for him. Being rejected seemed to just throw him into just a point of absolute craziness. But I agree with Lizzie that some of it had to do with his childhood. And again, as she said, absolutely no excuse for that kind of behavior.
I want to hear about the EMDR, and I believe I've done that. I've done that for just anxiety, and I found it very helpful. I mean, I've done that here in Birmingham. Did that help you? Because I know it's used for post-traumatic stress disorder.
It really did help for me. That the incident with the $100 bill, I think the kidnapping, and then what happened in London and being abandoned essentially were all pretty traumatic events. And so I didn't do it with the electrodes. It was like these hand paddles, I guess. There are different ways to do it. Essentially, you've got to be, hydrated and
Yes.
calm, and all these, like the setting has to be right. And then you relive in your mind the abusive situation, almost like you're watching a movie, and there's no words. And I think what's really hard about EMDR is that the patient is doing all the work. Really, the therapist is there as a guide, but you're doing the work yourself. So you relive this traumatic experience. And then when that's over, and there's this pulse with these paddles you're holding. When that's over, you have to rate, like, okay, what were you feeling? Like, I mean, I might start crying or start even convulsing, or I was having these physical reactions. And it was like, well, what did you feel? Well, yeah, fear, anxiety, this, that, the other, a lot of negative emotion tied to that trauma. And then you had to rate it on a scale of 1 to 10. And then it's like, okay, let's go back in and do it again. And so probably watch the movie in my mind, if you will, 10 to 15 times, or however long it takes until you're really desensitized to it. And it's something that happened. Everybody turned out, everything was okay. Even though what happened was not okay, we're okay. Really letting that go. And it's amazing how much progress you can make in just a few sessions. And I think what that has helped me with is I suffer from a lot of musculoskeletal pain and some autoimmune kind of stuff. And my pain has been significantly minimized in these last 9 months than it has been in the last 8 years. So I feel like it was extremely beneficial for me to do that.
So it's been a psychosomatic thing. It's not just the mental. It has caused physical help. Okay, and I need to make a correction. That's not what I did. I think what I did was, I mean, I
It could have
sat
been biofeedback. There's all sorts of
Yeah, I
different.
sat there and texted and, we I mean, it was nothing. It was just more, I think it fed me brainwaves that were lacking, and mine was feeding me brainwaves that caused calm and sleep. So I think it was a different,
Okay.
but
Well,
but so because wow, you did a lot of work, so I did not do that. But it sounds so you would recommend that to someone with a trauma that they need to minimize or try to get rid of. You would recommend the EMD.
I would highly recommend it. The other thing that and there's, I think it's biofeedback is the other one that's similar. And I think both of these are designed to, you're in that flight or fight response and you can get stuck in that response where your reaction to certain things is always like, and you've always got this startle reflex on and you're burning through your cortisol and your high stress and all of that. What we did, or what I did with this EMDR was, I think, try to get out of the fight or flight and get into that sort of state of calm. And I've been working at processing life differently for a decade now. I mean, I'm a work in progress, but definitely much calmer overall than I used to be. And I don't think I have that response that leads to that high stress, which can burn out the immune system.
Well, I would love for you to, as we end, share your best advice to someone who might be in a situation where they are not married or they're not linked in arms for life with a person. What would you say? I've always told my children, if you see anger, run. Because that to me, that has just always been something. If you say, would you say that? Would you say that that's probably the most telling sign of someone who tends toward that, if they have anger?
I mean, I think anger is, sort of a normal response for people. This is something beyond anger. It's anger coupled with control issues, isolation is a big thing. And I think the advice I would give, if you think you're in a bad situation, share it with somebody, get somebody else's opinion. When you ask Jamie, did family and friends notice this? When I told my parents I was getting a divorce, they had no idea, because I always made excuses. If we were going to see my family and he didn't want me to see them, I made an excuse. So when I told my mother I was getting a divorce, she totally could not understand it. She said, "Oh my God, you've got a great life and an easy life and everything looks good." And at that point, I shared with them what my experiences had been. But prior to that, they had no idea. My
Mhm.
own sister really didn't know about this until last summer when Lizzie and I spoke at the Fort Bend County Women's Center. She
Oh,
said she
wow.
never really realized why I divorced him.
That's
And so I think my advice is, if you think you're in a situation like that, talk to people, especially, you said young girls, talk to your parents, talk to your friends. I've heard, stories of college girls finding themselves in abusive situations, and it's usually their girlfriends who see it
Mhm.
and maybe don't say anything because they don't want to rock their friendship. And that's another thing. If you see your friend in a situation that you think is abusive, to
Mhm.
talk to your friend both ways. So that would
Mhm.
be my advice. Lizzie, I'll let
That's
you.
great advice.
No, I think, like you said, anger is one sign. Mom mentioned there's many others. And I agree that where mom said her sister didn't know, I told my best friend from high school we were doing this last summer and she had no idea and was
Mm.
like, I love your dad. I mean, my dad was like the crazy fun uncle who would come visit all of us and hang out at Tulane, or, we'd go to his house in high school and just have good times. So no one knew. And I think, we talk about my 13th birthday in London. There's one version of that story where we went to, I saw Michael Crawford and Phantom and we shopped at Harrods and it was a dream come true trip with unlimited budget for whatever I wanted to buy for my birthday, But then toward the end of the trip, when it was my actual little party, there was the cake, happy birthday, Lizzie. There were 3 rolled joints and, the watch that I didn't think he'd bought me from Gucci. And it became about the 3 rolled joints. And when my brother and I did not want to do drugs with him, that's when the violence escalated. We were effing babies and we're so boring. And that's when he called the woman in Switzerland and left us there. And so I think, well, first of all, if any women are in a marital situation and they have children and they sometimes think like my kids don't see this, I'm protecting them, I'm taking the brunt of the abuse so they don't see it. That's a false reality, that the kids do see it and they do know. I don't think you can hide what's going on in the home. And it's so important. There's just, I did not tell anyone, I think, because I was ashamed that my dad would treat me that way and I was embarrassed. And so I didn't want anyone to know. And I think that today is very different, where there is no shame. There's no reason to be embarrassed. Women and children no human deserves to be treated poorly by another human. And so there are so many resources. But I think a lot of women, I think the difference between people who do end up in shelters and maybe people like us who were never in a shelter, the difference is that support network. Maybe they don't have, there could be a socioeconomic difference as well, but a lot of times it's just they've been so isolated from friends and family by their abuser that they don't have the network built. So if they don't have friends and family to lean on, I know there are incredible services. And I know here in Birmingham, I think, is it King's Home? I'm trying to think.
Hannah Home, King's Home. There's a lot.
There's a lot.
And if you have any resources to share, because we have listeners from all over, and you can probably do an easy Google search wherever you live and find help for domestic abuse shelters. And because yes, the less of a support structure you have, the more likely you are to stay in a bad situation because it's all you've got.
Right.
Wow. Well, this is something that is very hard to hear, but you all have risen above it and you're so accomplished, and now you're using what you went through to help others. And I'm just very grateful that you shared it. And my hat is off to you both.
Well, thank you, Jamie. The other piece that I would add in terms of, what someone can do, and this isn't the first step. The first step is to get out of the situation. But as part of someone's own healing, I really recommend that giving grace and forgiving the abuser, whether they apologize or not. I think that, I don't need to carry around hate and ugliness inside of me. So to say, I didn't forget what happened, but I have forgiven him, to the point that I officiated his funeral with my brother. And that was a cathartic experience.
That's amazing. Ladies, thank you. Thank you so much. I'm honored to have had you on. And I know this will be a blessing to many. We may never know, but I know it will.
You're welcome, Jamie. It was really a pleasure to be on with you.
Thank you. And Lizzie, thank you. And I hope to see you soon, since you're down the street. And you always have a place at the table if there's anything you want to come back and share.
Oh, thank you, Jamie. I just love you, and we love being on SavvyCast. And I know you're a resource to so many women out there, and really all aspects of life, everything, they deal with, from the fun things like what to wear and what to cook, and the not so fun things like this and some of the bigger health issues, etc. So you do a great job. Thanks so much.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Well, until next time, have a fabulous rest of your day. And ladies, you as well. Hi, everyone. I hope you enjoyed this episode of the SavvyCast. If you'll take the time to rate, review, and subscribe on iTunes, that would mean so much. As always, thank you for listening and have a blessed day.